Greetings, everyone. This is Ayman Tarabishy, the ICSB Executive Director of the International Council for Small Business. I'm also the Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the GW School of Business. And I am delighted to have you again here for another ICSB Exchange webinar. And this is a really important webinar here. And I'm just delighted that somehow we all got together on it. And I think I don't call it accident, I call it serendipity, when things align for a specific reason here. So we've seen from around the world the effects of MSMEs and what happened to them because of COVID and Corona here. And we've seen how it all started and how everything from one region of the world to another region of the world, how this has impacted businesses, small businesses, large businesses, and people as well. So as we go around the world to understand the impact of COVID-19 on business, on SMEs here, I am excited. We've done examples from Europe, we've done examples from South Korea, we've talked a lot about Latin America and North America, but today we have a special webinar here, and we're going to be focusing on China, and we're going to be focusing on COVID-19, its effect on Chinese SMEs, on entrepreneurship here. So this is important. This is important because it brings together the full picture of what's going on to SMEs around the world. So saying this, we are delighted and honored to have a foremost expert on this topic here. We talked a couple of weeks ago via webinar, and I invited him to come and join us, and I know he's busy doing many different things, but he gladly said that he'll join us here. So let me introduce the webinar itself. It's called Chinese SMEs and Entrepreneurship After COVID-19. Challenges and opportunities here. And I am delighted and honored to introduce Professor Yipeng Liu, is a full professor in management and organizational studies and founding director of Center for China Management and Global Business, CMGB, at Henley Business School, University of Reading in the UK. The CMGB Center is one of the UK's leading progressive think tanks with a focus on business links between China and the UK. Professor Liu obtained a doctorate, magna cum laude, in management from Mannheim University in Germany. His research interests center on international entrepreneurship and emerging market multinationals from a cross-cultural and comparative perspective by embracing the notion of West meets East, or East meets West. Professor Yipeng, we are delighted to have you here. We are honored to have you here. And this is an important topic, so I'm going to stop talking, give you the floor, and we'll take a lot of notes here, and then we'll open up for questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayman, a very kind introduction. I'm also very delighted to join today's webinar with SSB members and friends all over the world. So today, I'd like to share some of my thoughts, observations on the opportunity and challenges for the Chinese SMEs and entrepreneurship after COVID-19. So as Dr. Ayman already mentioned, that this is hopefully will be an interesting topic for all of us throughout the world, and try to understand what are the challenges and opportunities faced by the Chinese SMEs and entrepreneurs, particularly after the COVID-19. So I'd like to organize today's session by following this structure. So we'll begin by introducing a research paper that I recently published together with some colleagues to look at the business and management implications of COVID-19 from an Asian perspective. And then we will zoom into the Chinese case and to look at, in particular, the macro as well as the macro dimensions. So we try to understand the Chinese manufacturing as well as service SMEs. So what are the challenges they are facing? And then I like to look at more micro level, share some recent survey and studies that look at the confidence of Chinese entrepreneurs before and after COVID-19. And there is also one dimension I like to highlight, which is the role of technology and digital economy. So how SMEs and entrepreneurs can use the COVID as an opportunity to transform them in order to grow and thrive. And then I will close by sharing some examples, which I think quite interesting from the Chinese case to look at how SMEs navigate through the COVID-19 crisis. So we'll start by looking at a recent paper. So this paper is co-authored with two colleagues. One is from Henley Business School, and the other is from Singapore. So the motivation for this study is really trying to understand what are the business and management implications of COVID from an Asian perspective. So here we took China, Singapore, and South Korea as three regions to look at and compare different dimensions. So for example, what are the impacts of COVID on the economics and business, different industry sectors? And then what are the government support and rescue packages for business and societies? And also what will be the implications for COVID regarding global supply chains and global business collaboration? So the paper actually we use the framing of resilience, agility, and entrepreneurship because we think that is quite important for us to understand the phenomenon. And I like to point it out here one interesting word, basically the Chinese word for crisis. Because in Chinese word, crisis actually has two words. One is wei, which means crisis. And the other word is ji, jihui, means opportunity. So I think the Chinese word of crisis is a very powerful perspective to unpack the notion of crisis. So therefore, I think it's quite important for SMEs and entrepreneurs to try to leverage and to look at the positive aspect of crisis and try to develop appropriate responses in order to capture the opportunity. I will not delve too much about this study because it's online and you are more than welcome to read and comment. So what I like to do is to continue, then zoom in to look at the case of China. So what I want to share first is more like a macro level observations. So first is the demand side. And as we know, the consumer service sector has been most affected by COVID-19 in China because of the public prevention measures such as the city or town lockdown and traffic control. The consumer service sector has a serious negative impact. And even though people can go online shopping to buy the must-have consumer goods, however, a number of the consumer service sector has been deeply affected by COVID. For example, hospitality, cultural tourism, and restaurants, hotels. So, and then if we look at the more macro data, like the GDP growth as an indicator, so 2019, China has a GDP growth of 6.1%. And this year, it was predicted to be in a range of 5.5 to 6. So because of the COVID effect. So if we turn it around to look at the supply side, where SME actually has played a very important role, as we all know that the big impact of COVID is really about like close the factory and the work stoppage. So the factories and the manufacturing firms like cannot operate anymore. So therefore, there's a rising cost as well as a survival risk for some SMEs. So, and the big top line challenges is really about cash flow disruptions and operating cost expenses. So, and in particular, some small and less resilient SMEs may face the risk of bankruptcy. So it really shows that the supply side and the risk and the cost for SMEs. So what I like to do is let's take a look at both the manufacturing as well as the service SMEs. So what are the particular challenges they have been facing because of COVID-19? And we'll first look at the manufacturing industry. So as we all know that China is the basically the factory of the world. So a lot of products were produced in China, and there are a lot of manufacturer plants. And however, so the SMEs actually, as we all know, the notion of liability of smallness, and so the SME manufacturer firms, they already very vulnerable and because of this liability of smallness. For example, the limited industry access, and then they have limited R&D capabilities, product portfolio, or constraints from upstream or downstream. But the COVID-19 has caused significant challenges for the survival and development for manufacturing SMEs, and actually exaggerated the problems. So I just here list a couple of the top line factors for us to reflect. For example, the shortage of talent and lack of market, lack of capital. So especially the very high financial cost and few financing channels. Lack of supply, the raw materials, accessories, and parts, equipment, and also lack of services, for example, transportation, training, advertisement. So these are all the top issues posed by the COVID for the manufacturing SMEs. So if we look at the service sectors, what I like to do here is to try to look at the different sectors. And all in the service industry. So the first is actually, I think, is very much kind of heated by COVID-19 is the catering industry. So as we know that the restaurants and all the bars are closed, so basically this whole industry is at standstill, and they also have very high cost as well. So according to the China Chain Store Management Association survey from February 29th and 1st March. So as of the 1st of March, so basically 5% of sample companies in this survey participated no longer had cash to support business operations. And another almost 80% of the sample companies cannot survive 3 months on its own cash. So it really shows that this catering industry has been greatly affected. And also the catering business are struggling with delivery because after the pandemic, over 90% of the chain enterprises do takeaway now. However, the profit margins are much lower than dine-in. So the takeaway revenue is less than 5% of the original dine-in services. Or if some business is doing pretty well, it can only cover up to 20%. And then another factor is because of the supply chain instability of these enterprises in the catering industry. So after we look at the catering industry, I like to take another look at the tourism industry. So tourism industry, as we all know, is a very much environmentally sensitive industry. That is kind of influenced both by external and internal factors. And because of this COVID, the tourism industry actually led to severe decline in slum and creating actually a tourism crisis. So on February 20th, there was a report from the China Tourism Economy Blue Book says that forecast the negative domestic growth in the first quarter of 2020 is 56% minus. And then they were also with an annual revenue loss of over 1 trillion yuan. And the impact of the tourism industry is reflected in the following 4 areas. So first, the scenic sport operating enterprises have to close their doors because no people will go visit them. And second, the hotel businesses. As we know, it's very much a labor-intensive industry. So the labor cost counts very high of their revenue, so they still need to pay this salary. And then the third dimension is really kind of the long online travel platforms and offline travel agencies, because people do not go to visit different places. And the fourth element is because of transportation, simply because people don't take flights or trains. So the tourism industry is also significantly affected in the service industry. So the last service industry I'd like to take a look is actually is quite unique to a Chinese context, is the film industry. Because as we know, the Chinese New Year is one of the largest traditional festivals, and the film industry really view the Spring Festival as the movie going public event, and they bet a lot on this. However, this year, as we know, the COVID-19 happened by the end of January, and that's exactly the time of the Chinese New Year. So if you look at the box office within 30 days, from the first day of the first month of the first year and 30 days, the absolute value of the box office in 2017 to 2019 is in the range of a very high number, right? So, however, it's also almost about 1/5 of the annual box offices. But as a fact of the COVID-19, the 2020 Spring Festival experienced almost no harvest. And there are mainly two reasons. One is the impact on the cinema companies. The cinema companies have to close their doors. And the second is really about the production side of the movie industry. So after we look at the service industry with these three sectors as examples, what I like to show is here is how about the SMEs? So were the SMEs perform well, or were the biggest hit by the COVID-19? So here is another survey done by the China Association of SME Enterprises on the impact of COVID on SMEs in China. So in this survey, there are over 6,000 enterprises participate, and as you can see, it is a wide, balanced spread across different regions in China. And also, the survey actually showed over 86% of enterprises were greatly affected by the COVID-19, and 38% of SMEs reported severe impact with operations. If you look at the bar chart, so severe impact with operations temporarily suspended. And then there are also like close to 30% enterprises reported particular severe impact and result in a loss. So that really shows that the SMEs were hardest hit by the COVID-19 in China. And then the SMEs basically face financing difficulties. And so if we look at this one, this figure basically tells us the time that the enterprises can sustain their operation. So if you look at the right-hand side, the blue bar chart, so it's 33% of business funds can last less than 1 month. And only 10% of the whole survey reported they could last than 6 months. So if you look at the chart on the left-hand side, so it's over 67% of enterprises responded with a decrease in business income, and about 20% of enterprises were unable to repay loans in time, that an increased pressure on working capital. That really demonstrates the pressure on the financing side for the SMEs in China as well. So another side of this equation is really the market demand. And the COVID has caused a market demand to shrink dramatically. And as you can see that the top difficulty pressures faced by the enterprises, so 30% of the enterprises reported a decrease in market orders, and the 27% reported they faced loss of customers. And not only the SME is suffering from a lack of supply from domestic partners, suppliers, but also the overseas orders were down significantly, 70% year on year. That also shows that these the overseas export market is shrinked dramatically, and that can really affect the survival and development of SMEs in China. And however, the companies also take some actions. So these chart shows that what the next steps the enterprises will do in order to navigate through this COVID-19 crisis. Interestingly, according to the survey, about 47% of these companies try to get some work started first. So they try to do something first. And another important dimension is really about the digital transformation. So 29% of the enterprises accelerate their transition to online and digital transformation. And after the COVID-19, nowadays, the companies or SME in China, they already get used to. They adopt the remote office and working collaboration platforms via internet online. So as we know, perhaps that will become the new norms of working in the future. I would like to show another quite interesting index, which is the Small Business and Medium Enterprise Development Index. It's a reflection of the economic performance of SMEs in China, and it includes 8 industries. So as you can see that the index actually developed over time, and the last index was reported in May last month. It was 86.6 and up 3.5 points from the previous months. So of the SME surveyed, over 90% of them have resumed work, with the best resumption being the SME industry enterprises. Although at present China's the fight against this COVID-19 has achieved significant and strategic results, but SMEs are still facing many difficulties. So the top line difficulty is really, there's a significant decline in the export market, and they face financing difficulties as well. They have very high cost to operate. So these are the 3 things. So after we look at this, this overall index, what I like to share, maybe it's also interesting to take a look at the sub-index in this study. So if you look at as we mentioned that the 8 industries were included in this index. So if you look at the May, so last month's data, so 7 sub-industry indices actually increased. There was only 1 industry decreased, but still all indices still below the boom threshold 100. So which means that the index is below 100, so it means still it's not in the boom phase. So the economy is still not fully recovered. And also the macroeconomic sentiment index increased, and is quite encouraging to see now is this index, sentiment index, past the threshold of 100. And however, the money index declined, as you can see the right-hand side in the table. Particular cost index and capital index dropped, so decreased. And so what is the current SME performance in China after the COVID-19? Overall, the picture is quite encouraging. So which means that the economy is recovering. So the business confidence has improved and the market expectations also improved. But however, the operating costs also increased. Again, the funding tensions still continue. Both supply and demand for labor increased, and the index of investment willingness also increased, and also the enterprise efficiency improved as well. So the overall picture is the current SME performance improving, so it's quite encouraging. Hopefully that also is a positive sign for the global economy as well. And what I like to show next, I think this is another interesting study. After we look at the macro level data observations and different industries, so how about our entrepreneurs in China? So do they feel more confident or less confident compare pre the COVID and after COVID? So this is one study done by some Chinese colleagues. They have looked at like the enterprise innovation and entrepreneurship service of China. So they have a total over quite a substantial number of samples collected, and The valid sample is 1,700 sample enterprises. And then this survey also cover 18 industries, so it's a widespread. And the regions also cover most of the regions in China. And here within this survey, the SME entrepreneurs account for 41% of all correspondents. So which means that the survey really gives us the opportunity to look at the differences between the entrepreneurs and, let's say, executives. So for example, the managers, general managers, and other type of managers, they counted for 48%. So I would like to share a couple of the findings here, just try to illustrate how the behavior side, the attitude of the entrepreneurs changed in China. So here, the first one is the entrepreneurs are quite anxious, but not fearful. So what this survey has done is they ask the attitudes of entrepreneurs or chairman or non-executive, non-entrepreneurs, here we call them executives, in face of COVID-19, and rating according to 4 categories: anxiety, fear, worry, and optimism. So as we all know, actually, the entrepreneurs, they are significantly different from non-entrepreneurs. So if you look at the chart upper left, so significantly different. And even though entrepreneurs are anxious, but they are not fearful, which is quite encouraging. And then if we compare the entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs before and post-COVID, so if you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, the before the epidemic, the entrepreneurs have higher confidence values than non-entrepreneurs, while the entrepreneurs' optimism values under COVID-19 are lower. So it's quite interesting. Another dimension I'd like to share is the regional distribution of the entrepreneur attitudes. Because as we mentioned, this survey has covered the different regions in China. And we can see, as we all know, that the most economic powerful regions in China is the Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangdong, where we call them Beishangguang. They are more attentive and actually more sensitive economic fluctuations. So as we can see from the survey as well, so compare the pre and post COVID-19, the most significant setback to entrepreneur confidence actually happened in Beijing. And although Guangdong and Shanghai entrepreneurs also have a strong fluctuations of their confidence value compared to other regions. Interestingly, the entrepreneurs in Zhejiang maintain rather stable before and after COVID. So as we can see, the Zhejiang province, the attitude of the entrepreneurs changed. So the confidence. So after we look at the regional differences, how about industries? Because the different industries, entrepreneurs working, they might also, the industry characteristic may also affect the entrepreneur confidence level. So if we look at the industry across the board, it's quite interesting to see actually light manufacturing and residential services have the highest values of anxiety. Yeah. So these are the industries, they are very anxious about the COVID-19. And then if you look at the dotted line in blue box and the service industry, right? So the service industry, both the business and residential service industry actually show highest optimism about the future. So, which means that they are more optimistic for the future. So I think this is really an interesting study to just to show that on the individual level, from behavioral perspective, to understand the attitude change and the confidence change of the entrepreneurs, both before and after the pandemic. Another interesting dimension I think I like to mention here is the role of technology in the fight against COVID-19. Because as we know, in COVID-19, China already has a relatively established internet powerhouse. The entire society in China, including both individuals and organizations, were already digitalized to some extent. So as we know, like online payment, like Payball or Alipay, these applications, as well as the different apps, for example, like WeChat, and these actually widely spread in the society. Now, almost everybody using them as long as they have the access to the technology. So the digital technology actually supported information transformation and prevention of the pandemic based on strong network and various technology tools. And in particular in China, there are different interesting applications have been developed in order to trace and track the virus spread. And because our seminar is more on the business side, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But the point here I like to highlight is at the same time, the socio-economic operation during the pandemic, the live services, online healthcare, and work and learning has really emerged as a result of the new digital economy ecosystem, because the infrastructure is there. And a lot of companies actually use this COVID-19 as an opportunity to transform themselves, including SMEs. So why I say that? Because as we know, when this COVID-19 came, countries, nations around the world all use the metaphor of wartime. So we have to fight against this virus. So using this COVID-19 as a wartime response, it actually presented a new opportunity to promote the development of China's digital economy. Because as we know, the reasons for slow development can be past dependence or the high switching costs from the old technologies. But because of the COVID, this wartime response really put additional short to break the lock-in effect and become a major factor in promoting digital transformation, digital implications across the board in many, many industries. So first, the COVID-19 really led to changes in consumer behaviors, consumer learning, and adjustment to the business management practices, as well as decision-making process in different sectors. And also it pushes some industry to reach a critical scale relatively quickly and enter a profitable stage. So for example, remote office, online education, online healthcare are a very clear indication of the future for a vibrant digital economy. And also in order to overcome the sunk cost of the traditional IT industry, there is an acceleration of new IT implement. For example, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, big data infrastructure applications. So the message here is really, there's a sense of urgency to accelerate digital transformations for SMEs. And I think this phenomenon is not just for the Chinese SMEs and entrepreneurs, but also it has an implication for other SMEs and entrepreneurs throughout the world. So what I like to do in the last part to share a couple of examples to show how the SMEs in China actually navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic, how they transform their business model, how they adapt their operations, and how they strive to develop their business further. So the first case is the applications by using the TikTok live streaming. So TikTok is a very popular live streaming application in China, and people can live stream almost anything you like. So the SMEs also took the opportunity, and they also try to use this particular platform to sell their product services. For example, there is a online car selection. So you know the auto dealers, they can use the TikTok live streaming to view cars for customer online. So you can choose cars online, you can make orders. And there's one example, the Jitterbug account. It has more than 1,200 fans. And when they deliver the live broadcasting, and it can reach the over 10,000 people. So you can think about the scale and the size. So it's really kind of capture the economic scale by using this live streaming application. Another example is online house viewing. So the property can be viewed online, so customers can view the property and book it. So this is really an interesting case to see how a technology has empowered a different business to deliver their services online. A second example I like to share is quite close to our industry, is the education industry. And because of the lockdown and because people have to stay at home, and actually it has a very kind of strong impact on the offline education and training industry. And however, because of this, the players in the industry have to shift online immediately. So in order to survive the critical time, so the official online courses were launched. Many providers online offer their online courses. So for example, there is one example called Brain Bank. They canceled the offline training time for an entire year, and they use the forced to switch to online, and then they also create online communities to deliver. And even the founder joined this wave and to kind of broadcast online and try to engage with customers. So this is another case I think is quite interesting for us to think about. And the third case I like to share is actually from the catering industry, right? So if we look at the example or the industries that we start off by talking about the service industry, it's the catering industry. And then how the SMEs in this industry can try to prevent and control the virus, and also to build consumer confidence and attract consumers to their store. There are two examples. So one is called Happy West Pastry Company. So what they did is, because they have their own distribution system, so actually it's an advantage for them. And they also tweet through their public channel to tell the consumers how they upgrade the food and how they protect the personnel to ensure the safety. They also initiate the contactless distribution. And if you look at the pictures, they show that they have the mask, gloves, and they have the safety checks. It's really, so they want to boost the confidence of the consumers. And then another example is a restaurant chain. It's called Chef's Wife, a restaurant chain. So what they do, they want to attract customers to the store. So they told customers through the public tweets that they provide a healthy and safe dining environment for everybody, and they care about everybody. So if you look at the right-hand side, so that is how they communicate to the consumers, and they even have their own outbreak prevention team, and they check the temperatures. They also have created an outbreak prevention and control safety log to document so what happened, how many customers have come to the store. So these are all examples I think quite interesting to think about and to reflect. So how the SMEs in China in different sectors, they try to navigate through the COVID-19, they try to transform their business models, and they try to thrive and grow in order to become a surviving, not only survive, but also thrive in this challenging time. So I hope that today's webinar share with you some thoughts and interesting observations. So, and I'm very happy to answer questions and engage with the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yipeng. This is just an amazing presentation here, and I think a lot of people have learned a lot here. Let me first invite people with questions to put them in the chat section here. But let me start by asking you some questions here. In China, small businesses are everywhere. You cannot be in China where you're not, it's all predominantly small businesses here. But let's just be very directly to the point here. We know not all small businesses will survive, because of what's happened here. How do you see the evolution of small businesses happening in China moving forward? What's your reaction? Where do you think, say, Ayman, here's where I think this is all going to be heading towards?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you are right. So not all the business can survive, and it's a very big challenge in China and globally. So, and also, as we know, that SMEs has a very kind of a high kind of rate of death. But what I think in the Chinese context is really about that how the SMEs actually can take advantage of opportunities, but also try to transform themselves. So I think, as we know, and we have observed in China actually, so this virus is really changing many aspects of life and work. So the SMEs, those can capture the trends, can really understand and navigate through, they will survive. For example, as I mentioned early on, the example of the online teaching or online healthcare services. So this also joined the wave of digital economy. So I think these type of SMEs will have kind of more advantage to survive in the future. But of course, as I said, it's quite important for the, as we see that in China, an SME is not just the service, but also there is a whole manufacturing industry, SMEs. So in order for the manufacturing industry to survive, and they also need to adapt to this new global environment. So I think two things. One is really about the support from the government. So as we can see around the world, all the government has taken steps, and then some are very, very big steps to support SMEs. Yeah. So in China as well. So I will not go into details because the paper, as I mentioned at the beginning, already talk about different government support and rescue schemes for the SMEs for sector. I think that's really the important role can be played by the government. And secondly, we also need to think about what is the implications for this COVID, because there has been a lot of debates and conversation talking about this kind of over-reliance on global supply chains. So for example, so a lot of goods were produced in Asia, particularly in China. So now because of this COVID, so basically everything have to stop to move, right? So you cannot fly people, you cannot really easily fly goods anymore. So there is also a kind of ongoing debate, so-called a decoupling from the Asian or from the China economy. And so I think that is also kind of currently in the discourse. And then the SMEs in China also need to be aware of that, right? So they have to understand. So the export market, the global market has changed. The nature of the market will change, although it will take time. However, they have to adapt. They have to adapt their business model. They have to think about how they can adapt to this kind of, we call it a new norm or new norm of work. So, but I would not go to too much details in this because, as I mentioned, the paper I shared in the very beginning, we also talk about what will be the implications for the global supply chain, for the global partnership because of COVID from the Asian perspective. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, Yipeng, you have now one of the, what I call him, the Nicholas Tesla of entrepreneurship research, and he's on the webinar here, so be careful here. He asked you a very interesting question here. Be careful, I'm telling you, I am warning you. Dr. Norris Kruger is on it here, and so this is his question here. And nice job, Yipeng. How do we help SMEs to realize the opportunities that this crisis offers to reinvent themselves? And how do we help them to identify the best help to do so? So it's a two question. How do they make them realize? And then how do we help them identify the best help? What is the best help to do so?
So thank you very much. I think, yeah, so I'm really pleased that it's a big crowd today. So I'm very happy for this conversation. Yeah. Thank you very much again for your invitation. I think, so the first question is really about how the SMEs can really adapt themselves. So I think, again, I like to say that it's really about like flexibility, agility. So they have to think about how they can adapt quickly because and actually some business or some SMEs are comparatively better to others. Yeah? So if you look at the more in the IT industry or the digital economy, much better prepared than the conventional manufacturing industry, right? So they have actually, well, the starting point are different. But however, in order for them to really to develop and thrive, I think the business has to join forces together, So here, what I like to do, maybe I can share another example that as a kind of innovation from the food and beverage industry. So the traditional chain products to the channel brands. So it is, again, this is a example from the catering industry.
Aywa.
So the basically COVID really kind of presented an opportunity for the catering industry. And why I say that, because this is an interesting happening in China. And you know, the Jingdong.com is one of the largest internet giant. And what they did, they actually launched the Restaurant Retail Development Alliances in February. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to promote the restaurant brand to open up the production of semi-finished fast food. Because the restaurants, if let's say people do not go to a restaurant anymore, again, you have the opportunity to sell the prepared or semi-finished food, and then expand the sales through Jingdong channels in order to achieve and actually transform the supply chain. So I think this is also another example. And as you can see, a lot of SMEs actually join forces with Jingdong's initiative. So not only does this help the catering company diversify their business, but also it provides them with a greater source of ingredients. So I think this is really an interesting example to see who will succeed and who might fail. So really you have to partner and with all the other industry, with other industry and players. And regarding your second question, I think also it's quite important for us to remember that we need to build an ecosystem. And we need to build a system to support SMEs. So I'm very pleased to know that Norris Cougar is also here. So he's an expert on ecosystem. He delivered a wonderful webinar last week. So I think it's a similar thing here in China. So I have to build an ecosystem in order for the SMEs to thrive and to grow together. And then the ecosystem involves many partners and stakeholders. So actually the educators and the universities and public sectors also can play an important role. And again, the government also needs to help the SMEs, and they have to listen. But my observation and my research in China, really I found out that the Chinese government are very open to listen to ideas. They especially would like to listen to some innovative ideas in order to help them to grow the business, to develop the economy. So I think that's really a very encouraging sign. And if really you look at this COVID-19, and then I'm not saying to compare different countries around the world, but if you look at how China has taken actions, and especially how the business sectors, how the SMEs have adapted themselves, have reinvent their business model, that is quite remarkable to see. And then to summarize, I think really in order to support them, we need a more holistic approach. We need a better ecosystem to help the SMEs and all the relevant stakeholders to grow together. So I'm a strong believer, collaboration is the key. Collaboration and cooperation is the key. So I hope that answers some of the question. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a question here that I find very interesting here. They go, thank you for your excellent presentation, Professor Liu. As far as I am concerned, export accounts for a very higher percentage in the Chinese economy. So they export more, Chinese small businesses export more. However, currently there are few demands outside. Besides, under the tension environment between China and the US, because of the political reasons, what do you think the Chinese SMEs can overcome their difficulties in exporting? It seems this is a big challenge right here because, you know, people are exporting less, SMEs are exporting less, and the environment is not really conducive for this exporting. What's your reaction to this statement / question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a tough one because that's right. So the tension and also these basically the export market is shrinking dramatically. As also I mentioned that if we look at the SMEs, the survey also found out actually there's a 70% drop year on year on the export. And also we understand that Chinese SMEs highly rely on export market. So what can they do? I think it's a very, very challenging and tough. So they have to really think about how they adapt their business, but also remember we have a very big market inside China. I think the consumption base is also very, very huge. So, and basically we have to think about how to kind of to educate the consumers and that's the consumers to spend their money. So I think one effective way will be in domestic consumption. So domestic consumptions, and then again, the domestic consumption is not just saying that you simply sell the same products you export to the domestic customers. That might not work because the needs, their demand will vary very much. And especially there are a lot of like contextual characteristics. Actually, they shape and influence what kind of products and services the domestic customer will need. So what I think will be important for the SMEs in China, especially for the export-driven SMEs, they really have to understand and shift it, try to understand how they can leverage their capabilities, production capabilities, organization capabilities, in order to meet the demands or maybe create a demand domestically. I think that will be a huge market for these SMEs. But of course, on the other hand, I also think that even though the overseas order has been dropped dramatically, but I don't think that can happen quickly, because if you look at this kind of the global value chain or supply chain, so to speak, so it's quite complicated. And in order for other countries really to build up, it takes time. So I think the SMEs in China still have a period of time to transform themselves. So it will not happen from today to tomorrow. So even though currently they face drop of the order, but then it might still come up. So the international orders and market, but they definitely need the sense of urgency to transform their business in order to, I always say that the Chinese markets, the blue ocean markets, you have to think about where is your market and how you can serve the market needs. And based on my research and my activities in China, I've seen a lot of very innovative companies. They really create really interesting businesses. And then that comes from their deep understanding of the local market, of their consumer behaviors, and of the contextual factors. Thank you.
One question here goes, I read China has over 11,000 plus business incubators, accelerators. Can you confirm this? Is that true, over 11,000? And how do Chinese government support the sector with all these incubators and accelerators and so on?
Thank you. So actually, one of my research area is entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem. So I have some knowledge about this. I think, the number is in a range is correct. And then there's actually a boom from the mass innovation and entrepreneurship movement in China, especially after 2015, that the Prime Mr. Li Keqiang has this the mass entrepreneurial innovation as the drive for the economic boom. So therefore, there are a lot of like incubators or accelerators program throughout China. The government has put a lot of money on them, but however, I think there are two challenges based on my observations. First is the accelerators or incubators, let's say incubators throughout China, they look more or less the same. So there's a high level of homogeneity across them. So how can you think about it? It's pretty much like the WeWork model. Right? So you have the like the space, and entrepreneurs come together, they can work together. So they do not really offer the support. What I mean is the necessary support services for the entrepreneur in order to grow and develop their businesses. And I think there is a big gap in the Chinese market as far as I understand. So that's the first thing. So there's a huge homogeneity across the incubators. Secondly, and actually linked to the first example we work. Because of the COVID, as we have seen and we can predict in the future, all this co-working space or co-working sharing space, they will face challenges because of social distancing, because of the spread of the virus. So therefore, people, especially these incubators, they also have to think about another way to transform themselves. Because if not, then they have to close their doors. So how to transform? Again, I think the digital technology will be a very important way for them to transform themselves. So how to help the entrepreneurs to build a business, but then again, it's a huge challenge as well. So again, so the entrepreneurship and the mass entrepreneurship innovation in China is booming, and the power of entrepreneurship in China is very fascinating. So I think in the long run, so there will be more and more entrepreneurs, either in incubators or outside of incubators. And after the pandemic, they will also continue to invent new business practices, new business models in order to create the products and services for the customers. Thank you.
Good. One last question here, and this comes from Sarah here. She goes, great presentation. You mentioned the digital transformation of SMEs was much easier because of the already present infrastructure. How do you think SMEs could be helped to transform themselves toward the digital economy where there is no such well-designed infrastructure?
Oh yeah, that's actually a very good question. That's true, because as we said, the manufacturing industries, some of them actually are quite lay behind. And I think I have one slide here I'd like to share. Yes, so I think the manufacturing industries, especially, I think maybe this can respond to Sarah's question. So there are kind of four aspects how why there are some kind of industries they are not very much prepared for this digital transformation or digital upgrading. And the first would be like an insufficient digitalization of enterprise themselves. So a lack of digital response capability. And secondly, they also localization personnel, and they really have that kind of lag behind of the digital curve. And the third, it could also limited accumulation of industrial big data. So the mismatch between the supply and demand, and also the cooperation between the upstream and downstream of industry chain. And also the fourth could be that the supply chain of SMEs is broken and the capital is tied, which seriously threaten development of industry. However, I think what is really the key message here is the COVID has posed as a big shock, external shock to these SMEs, who are not ready with the digital infrastructure. They really push them to think hard and then try to upgrade quickly and rapidly. If they cannot do this, sadly, they might not survive this test, because as we see, it will be a very painful experience for many, many companies. But however, I think for those companies who can survive, who can pass this survival test, they will really reinvent themselves and transform themselves. So for example, like some companies in the industrial software industry, they kind of like design the platform. They try to help the manufacturing industry to adapt and to work flexibly in the virtual space. So I see the trend and the movement, and actually I'm very kind of fascinated about this development in China. So I think if we can go back to the very beginning, when I started this seminar, I talk about like crisis, the Chinese version of crisis. The Chinese people, when they talk about crisis, they always see on one hand crisis, on the other hand is opportunities. So the SMEs, for those who can see the opportunities, who can grab the opportunity, who can leverage and take advantage of opportunities, will be the SMEs, will grow and thrive in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. This is exceptional, and we have 1 minute left here. So what I'd like to do is thank Professor Yipeng for an excellent presentation. This is absolutely beyond our expectations. This is exactly what we wanted, to get a feel and a touch and an understanding of what's going on with SMEs in China here. So we are delighted to have you here, and we are delighted to have you join us on this. And I
Thank
want
you
to
very
thank
much.
all the, absolutely. I want to thank all the participants that have joined here and are part of this here. And what we're going to do now is take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to switch to the meeting, an ICSB webinar meeting, in which we'll have a friendly conversation with Professor Yipeng. If you are a member, we will allow you in that. If you're not a member, I urge you to encourage you to join ICSB as a member to have access to this. With that, I want to thank you again, Professor Yipeng. This has been wonderful. And I want to thank all the participants for joining here, and I'll see you in 5 minutes in the other session. Take
Okay,
care, everybody.
thank you, Raj. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.